Okay, so continuing my coverage of is the GTX 1060 still good enough for 1080p gaming, let's look at Control. This is certainly not the newest game out there, but it is still one of the more graphically demanding games out there. And as you can see, we are struggling to maintain in the mid-30s frames per second range. However, that's because we're on the maximum settings. Now we are at 1080p because I think that's the resolution where this graphics card still makes the most sense. Now, if we switch down to the medium quality preset, let's see what happens. By the way, obviously no ray tracing happening on a 10 series card, so none of that. Hey, we're jumping all the way up into the mid-40s. And you know what? Things still look pretty good. We're still getting some screen space reflections in the water there. Not the most beautiful ones I've ever seen, but you know, things look okay. All right. So in a shooter style game, while this, you know, on my variable refresh rate monitor feels okay, like I could play this, I'd much rather be closer to, or hopefully locked in at, 60 frames per second. So we can drop down to the low settings. Give that a second to load in. And there we have it. Looks like we are now over 60 frames per second. And guys, the game still looks okay. Like, a lot of the graphics settings, I mean, they are visible. There are some visible differences between the two. Feel free to jump back and forth in the YouTube video. But, I mean, there's still some shadows. You can still see some of the foggy stuff. You can still see some reflections in the puddles. It's not like the low settings are just terrible or anything like that. Now, there's more that we could do. There's also resolution scaling in this game. So what if we went back to the high quality preset and then tried, instead of lowering settings, what if we tried lowering the render resolution scale? So first we should probably jump back in here and get a good look at what this looks like at the high settings at the native resolution scale, right? So there that is. Now, render resolution scaling down when you're already at 1080p generally doesn't work super well. I haven't tried it yet in this game. Let's go ahead and take a look. Let's try 768p and see how it goes. Now, this game has a pretty good internal render resolution scaler. Well, you know what? To my eye, that is not horrible. That is definitely not unplayably bad. Now, it gets us into the 50s, so it was a rather large frame rate increase. Now, in some of the further away details in motion, do you see how when I move, like when I stand still, I feel like the railings up here. When I'm standing still, I think it renders those together pretty well. But in motion, I feel like they break up a bit. I think if we go back to the native resolution, we're not going to see as much breakup on those when we move. Let's take a look though. So this is the native resolution scale again. And in movement, I do still see some breakup, some aliasing on those railings, but I don't think it's anywhere near as pronounced. However, I actually am quite impressed by that resolution scaler. Let's try going all the way down to 720. That would be even slightly more performance gain, most likely here. Performance gain doesn't seem that much better than 768p, to be honest. And honestly, 720 versus 768. Yeah, in motion, I'm not a huge fan of the breakup in the image there, but I think the question now is, it depends on what frame rate you're targeting, because I don't think it makes sense to do this low render resolution scale if you're just to get to play on the high preset. I don't think that was worth it. But what if we wanted to play on like the medium preset with the render resolution scale down at 768p? See, check that out. See, now we're getting much better frame rates than we even did by just dropping down to low. And like I said, I think the render resolution scaler in this game is pretty good. I could see myself playing on this. It's not that bad. Interesting. Now, just to see what kind of frame rate we really can get, let's go ahead and push all the way down to the low preset and leave it at that 768 resolution scaler. And check that out. So if you want to play the game and you're more concerned about gameplay, I want high frame rate. I've got a high refresh rate monitor and I want to actually be near that limit. It looks like we can play this game at over 100 frames per second, at least in this scene, which, while it isn't the most demanding in the game, it's also not the least demanding in the game. So yeah, it looks like we are consistently over 100 frames per second by going down to the 768p and the low settings. Now, the absolute farthest we could push this would be going down to the 720p resolution scale, which I don't think is going to get us, like I said, much different. But let's just go ahead and see how far we can push this. Hey, we're up over 120. So, can you play Control over 100 frames per second on a GTX 1060? Yeah, although it's not a true 1080p, it does look a lot, the resolution scaler in here is doing a fairly nice job. Like I said though, if we did want to not get the breakup in the image, we could certainly go for 1080p. And as long as you're willing to play at low settings, you can get away with a solid 60 frames per second, it looks like. Now, man, going down to that resolution scale is getting us all the way from 60 to over 100, like another 40 frames per second difference. So it really just depends on if the trade-off's worth it for you, because you definitely can see the trade-off. But that is a massive, massive frame rate boost, and like I said, not the worst resolution scaler I've ever seen. I'll be testing out some more games on this in the near future. Hope you all have an excellent day.